Hello, my chocolate loving friends. Welcome back. It's Carla with Opening Chocolate Hair. And today I'm not going to talk about a chocolate company. I am going to talk about a part of the cacao pod that has been showing up more prevalently in mainstream food products. And that is cacao pulp. So I have a few products here with cacao pulp in it. I have dried cacao fruit from Blue Stripes Cacao. I have a cacao fruit drink. I've also had a cacao fruit drink from Blue Stripes. And then I've got this from Oodalolly Chocolate, a cacao nectar, 100% cacao nectar, and kind of this squishy, you get the fruit pulp in this for other fruits. Where does cacao pulp come from? So I would have loved to have had a real cacao pod for you, but where I live, it's near impossible to get one this time of year without spending way more money than I want to. So I'm going to rely on my beautiful cacao pod sculpture from Beltran Cacao. Beltran. He makes these beautiful structures that are very hyper-realistic when it comes to the outside of the pod. So the cacao, so this is a cacao pod fruit that grows on a cacao tree, and the pulp itself comes from the inside. So you have this outer layer, but inside you have a semi-solid fruit flesh in the form of a wet mucilaginous layer surrounding the unfermented cacao beans. I'll put a picture up here of some cacao that I have taken apart previously, and you can see the gooiness. Obviously this is made out of wood, so it's much less gooey. In real life, it's more and more gooey. So a cacao fruit is a baccate-like fruit, which means it's berry-like. But there's a few things that you need to know about the pulp. So it surrounds each one of the cacao seeds or beans that are in here. There's usually 40 to 60 seeds in here. And it's very viscous. It is sweet. Well, it's viscous because it has a lot of pectin. It's sweet because it has glucose and fructose. And it has a low pH, between 3 and 4, because of the presence of citric acid. So it's a combination of modified, for people who are into botany, modified mesocarp and endocarp that develops during the ripening process. So you already know this because you eat fruit. You already know that as a fruit ripens, it gets sweeter and softer. Almost all fruit does that. The majority of fruit that you get in your grocery store does that, right? Strawberries, raspberries, apples, oranges, bananas, they all get sweeter and softer as they ripen. So what happens is in the pulp, as it ripens, it begins to accumulate sugar and acid, but as it gets closer to being ripe, the pectin actually decreases, so it becomes more gooey as it gets closer to being perfectly ripe. So there's these biochemical changes that are occurring, making it sweeter and softer. So that's a kind of a something that all fruit does in order to, the purpose of fruit, as a plant wants you to eat its fruit and spread its seed. That is the whole purpose of having a fleshy fruit like that. So it becomes sweeter and softer because that becomes more desirable as to the thing that is going to disseminate the fruit. So the pulp becomes sweeter and softer for the squirrels and the rats and the bats and whatever else, the monkeys that get a hold of it and eat it. They claw into the pod, crack open the seed. They could care less about the cocoa bean. They don't want that. It's bitter and nasty. They suck off all the pulp, which is sweet and lovely and squishy in their mouth, and then they discard the bean, and the bean can grow in the grass and another cacao tree. So the cacao tree is achieving what it wants, but we can also use that cacao pulp. So I remember reading a paper a long, long time ago. I had to look it up, but it was even older than when I read it. So it was actually published in a journal called Agricultural Waste in 1982 about the possibility of using cacao, they called it cacao sweatings, as a end product for farmers selling it. So this idea has been around for a long, long time. It's not until the general public got a hold of really strong concepts like antioxidants and polyphenols and flavonols, and those words became in the general public and a more health consciousness in our foods, that it became something that became commercially viable. So what happens is, if you're not familiar with how cocoa is made, so they harvest the pods, they crack open the pods, and as soon as you crack open the pods, they're exposed to yeast and bacteria that begin the fermentation process, like immediately. So as soon as that starts, yeast and bacteria are going to do the thing that they do, where they break down sugars into other products. Bacteria will utilize the lactic acid, they will utilize the acetic acid in here and change them through biochemical processes to other things. What has been shown is that the cacao pulp is necessary for good fermentation. That is definitely for sure something that needs to happen. You have to have some pulp for good fermentation, because it's been shown that the aroma molecules in the pulp, because they are fat loving, and when they are broken down by the bacteria and yeast, they can move into the seed and be deposited there in the fat, the cocoa butter in the seed. So the flavor of the pulp will have ultimately an effect on the flavor of the bean at the end. So I read an article, and I'm going to attach a few articles in the comments down below so that you can read them if you're interested. I read an article about how much pulp is needed for effective fermentation, but I can't find that article anywhere. It's frustrating. So I know that you don't need all the pulp, and farmers know this too, because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll let it drip for a day. So what's happening is, as soon as you open it, you want to get it when it has the most sugar, and so it's the sweetest and has all those polyphenols and flavonols and antioxidants that get lost through the fermentation process and every step of processing that goes on after that. So they collect it usually usually right after, within a day of opening the pods. So they'll either do this by stringing it up and dripping it. They can stir it in a big vat of some kind and collect the drippings below. And there's mechanical processes that can collect this. So there's the most common way I've seen it is a set of drums, rotating drums, perforated, so that the beans, as soon as they're removed from the pod, so they'll open the pod, remove the beans, take out the placenta, which is in the middle of all these beans here, and then they'll put the beans and pulp in these drums. There'll be a succession of drums, and they'll rotate gently to gently remove and collect the liquid that comes out of it. So it's usually a succession of drums that go through, and then the beans will still have enough pulp on the outside to successfully go through the fermentation process. Of course, it will be, to be safe, it needs to be pasteurized before it's consumed by humans. So it's usually centrifuged to remove large chunks. You could add a pectinase to break down to make it less viscous. You will pasteurize it the same way we pasteurize milk to make it safer from bacteria. And then you have your cacao pulp. So that's how you get the pulp. Usually small farmers will just do it manually, stirring it or hanging it. but you have to collect it right away because the fermentation process starts right away. And if you collect it later on in fermentation, it will have different biochemical characteristics. So they've studied this. They've shown that unripe, ripe, and overripe cacao pulp has different aroma chemicals in them, different flavors in them. The highest number I saw that was 56 different aroma compounds in a ripe pod. So that's a lot that could migrate into the seed eventually. Interesting thing, the pulp aroma concentration changes based on whether they were collected in a dry season or a rainy season. So if they were harvested in a dry season, there's a higher aroma diversity. But if they were harvested in a rainy season, there's a higher aroma concentration. So that's kind of interesting to know as well. So all of these things factor into not only the flavor of the pulp, but eventually the flavor of the cacao beans and chocolate that comes down the line. So I've got, so cacao pulp is mostly water. It's like 80% water. The rest of it is mostly sugars in the form of glucose. Then you've got some fiber in there with like pectin and cellulose, so the cell walls, hemicellulose. You've got a little bit of citrate, a little bit of fat and protein, some trace minerals like potassium, magnesium, calcium, iron, sodium, just trace, not huge amounts. So what I'll do today is I'm gonna I've had a couple of these before. I haven't had this one before, so I'm curious about this one. But I'm going to open them, and they should have flavor profiles just like chocolate. Like any fruit would have a flavor profile. So I'm going to open them up. We'll take a look at them, see what they are, try and figure out how they've been processed, and I'll let you know how they taste. So let's flip the camera around and do that. All right, so here's my 3 products. I think I'll start with the dried cacao fruit from Blue Stripes Cacao. They're based in New York. And I use these in my tasting sometimes because they last a long time, they transport well, and they do give you some idea of the flavor profile that you can have in cacao pulp. So this is dried cacao fruit, and I believe it's 100% dried cacao fruit. Let me check the ingredients. So yes, dehydrated cacao pulp. So they are claiming it as a health food, healthy things to it. So it's a like a fruit leather. It has a nice fragrant smell. So one of the things they noticed with all fruit, you know this intuitively, that unripe fruit, the cacao pulp is less diverse in its aroma profiles, has more green herbal flavors. So the plant doesn't want you to eat it yet, so it's not going to be as tasty. Ripe fruit has more of the aroma compounds that would fall into fruity, floral, spicy, those kind of things. So when the plant's ready for you to eat it, it makes it attractive to the disseminator. So this cacao fruit pulp, dried, has a nice honey smell to it, but it's not like it smells really nice and sweet, but it has a very tropical fruit, pineapple, mango, maybe if you are not familiar with those, you might describe it as apple-y. I've heard it described as lychee, but again, that can change depending on the genetics of the pod itself. So that's the dried cacao fruit. Then let's open this one. This is from Oodalali Chocolate. It's 100% nectar. So one of the things about the fruit and the pulp is they do technically have, they have more of the antioxidant, polyphenol, and flavanol compounds because they haven't been broken down biochemically or mechanically or through heat of fermentation or any other process. So this is interesting. Just gonna squeeze a bunch of it out. So it looks the same color as the other one. Let's taste. So it's got a pretty thick, it's pretty viscous, almost like an applesauce consistency. It smells like it's slightly fermented, just a little. And it tastes, I don't even know how to describe that taste. Lychee, apple, mango. It's good. You could use this to mix up a drink. It's definitely slightly sour. It's got a little bit of an acidic, it's definitely on the acidic side. But if you were to mix this in something, put it on your oatmeal or into your smoothie, it would impart a flavor from the nectar. But it's definitely not a chocolate flavor. None of this tastes remotely like chocolate at all. So let's try. So now I've got this cacao fruit soda. Let's give this one a try. So they all have a similar color, you can see. Nice and bubbly. So it does smell. Fun. So it does smell a little, I don't know what does that smell? It's cacao fruit. Now that I've smelled it twice. It's kind of got a little bit of a fermentiness to it. A little bit of like fermented grape. And it tastes, it's definitely on the acidic side. It tastes, what does that taste like? I would say like almost like a sparkling apple cranberry. Apple, that's hard because it leaves your mouth so quickly. Whereas chocolate, I have time to melt. It does have a long aftertaste though. It is tart. But yeah, it definitely, when you have all these things together, you recognize it as this is the cacao fruit flavor. I've had the drinks. So I know Blue Stripes makes a drink that they add cinnamon, they have one that has a pepper. These guys also make joca, I don't know how to say that properly. They also make ones with different flavors added. So this is just cacao and nothing. So it's just straight cacao fruit. So it is interesting to try. So that's cacao pulp. Let's flip the camera around and we will finish up. All right, so why cacao pulp is showing up as a product is twofold. One, because of the increase in nutritional health products, and two, because it provides the farmers with an income that was formerly a waste product. So they can collect some at the beginning, and then the fermentation process, the rest sweats off while they're being fermented, and then the rest goes when it's dried. So, as with all things nutritional, I will say take them with a grain of salt. I wouldn't replace any cacao drink with for my multivitamin. Sure, eat it, drink it if you want. Is it going to make you healthier? I don't know, maybe. There has not been a lot of work done on what's left over nutrient-wise after to cacao pulp after, say, pasteurization. A lot of it varies because it depends on where you're starting from. So different genetics in the cacao pods will have different composition in their fruit pulp. So you can't always say if we start with A, we'll end up with B. We're going to start with A sometimes, B sometimes, C sometimes, and we'll end up with this variety of thing at the end. Or even sometimes fermenters will mix beans from different stages of ripeness, from different plants, different genetics. So it's hard to say what the final product will contain. So I say eat it if you like it. Eat it if it's interesting to you. Is it this super health food that's going to cure all that ails you? Probably not. Can you eat enough of it? Again, it's always the dose that makes the difference. I don't know. Chocolate is a luxury food. Cacao pulp is something that I would consider also a luxury. This is not something that your average person is going to be consuming on a regular basis. So eat it if you like it. Is it nutritional? Maybe. Just have fun with it. I always say have fun with your chocolate. Eat it if you like it. If you like it, that's great. If you don't, that's also fine. So have fun with it. Try something new. Expand your horizons. If nothing else, it's expanding your palate. So that is cacao pulp. If you have any questions about pulp, the processes, what's in it, check out the links that I have below or drop me a question and I will see if I can answer it for you. Otherwise, I hope that you will subscribe and join me next week as we talk about more about chocolate and all things chocolate. Don't forget to hit the like button. See you then. Thanks for watching.